Yeah.
Good morning, Senate Transportation, Friday, March 1st. We're going to be going through the automatic traffic law enforcement bill, S-184, with our counselor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Donna Russo Savage. Excuse me, you have draft 3.1 of S-184, and the changes from last time are highlighted. The first change is at the top of page 7, lines 1 and 2.
Page 7.
What about page 3?
Oh, I'm sorry, was there something on 3 that I missed?
There's a highlight.
There is, you're absolutely right. Line 7, page 3, line 17.
10.
Right, remember it said at more than 11 miles above the speed limit, and the intention was actually 10, and so that's changed.
Good. We got that confirmed by Connecticut, where they had 15 and they're switching to 10. Yes.
More than 10.
In that presentation,
It's not 10 or more, it's 10, more than 10. Go ahead.
somebody said something about in Connecticut, it's 45 miles per hour in work zone, but we allow 55?
Yeah.
That's what Senator Kitchell said. I don't know if it's 55 in all work zones.
I don't know, but most of them I've seen have been 55.
I assume it depends on how constrained the area is. I don't know if Michelle Boomhauer, who's with us, has any insight on that.
I only ask because if that's 10 miles more, should we be considering, I like that we're doing 10 and not 15, but if we're already 10 miles faster than Connecticut, do we want to make this?
But then now we're down to a 5-mile difference, I think, for a pilot.
Yeah, and I don't know if we.
Let's let her roll.
Let's ask Michelle if she has any. Do you know if the speed limit is set always at a certain limit, or depends, or you don't know?
I'm afraid I don't know. My personal observation has been that most work zones I've seen on the interstates have been 55. But there could be others that are different.
That's what I've seen, and I think it's because the nature of the interstate, you've got broader shoulders, you've got, multiple lanes. So I think for the flow of traffic, as long as maybe when you're on secondary roads or something, it might be different, but generally.
The one thing that
We're talking about restricted access roads, right?
yeah, right.
So I think that's generally restricted.
I'm okay with just sticking with the 10 for now, but I wondered if we're going to talk about speeds for a second, if we wanted to consider what they had done in their,
Oh,
new program, if you're going over 30 or 20 or
Looks like
80.
80 miles an hour.
yeah, they picked 80, but we could just say like over 10 you get the violation, over 30 you don't get that first option. Or over 25, that would get you to.
I just want the V-Trans to feel more comfortable with it. Does that make it more complicated for this initial pilot? I support doing that. I'm just wanting to make this palatable to them.
And who's doing, I'm not clear yet, who's going to be reviewing and issuing the assessment?
Right now it's a law enforcement,
And which law enforcement is it?
state police, right? I think pretty sure it is.
Could it be a DMV enforcement officer?
It could be. Those highway patrol are certified law enforcement. So it could be.
Do they have a larger, more flexible staff that sits there?
No.
Not larger, that's for sure.
No, it's smaller.
More office-based? I just don't want to pull police officers.
Michelle, is the head of DMV a licensed law enforcement person? Usually they have been. Do you know?
I believe that they have always been, Jake Aliberto and others who have served in that role. What I can say is it's a very small number of officers in the entire pool. So we wouldn't envision that this program would be something that they could take on and still maintain the highway safety issues that they must face and deal with daily.
I mean, what we're doing is moving it more from the civil to actually, when you,
It just says a law enforcement officer, right? We don't say who in here has to do it. Page 7.
Law enforcement officer is defined on page 3, line 1. a state police officer, municipal police officer, motor vehicle inspector, capitol police officer, constable, sheriff, or
And
deputy
level 2
sheriff.
or 3, yeah.
So it could be, they could decide later who does it.
Mm-hmm.
I just heard in the testimony yesterday, some advice that sworn officers are in limited supply in Vermont, and if we put this on their plates, we're taking them away from very important responsibilities. Would we be comfortable with, or their qualified designee?
My understanding is the reason for this is that if you're gonna send it to the Judicial Bureau, you needed a law enforcement officer, but I don't know if Donna has any insight into the law of
I
this.
do not have any, but I can check into something if you'd like me to.
So we could, and I think we sort of talked about this, is that you probably need a alleged counsel from judiciary that's familiar with what it means, that the difference between a law enforcement officer writing a ticket and somebody that's not a law enforcement writing a ticket, and what the difference, if it really is like a parking ticket, then there is no really kind of due process.
Mhm.
And the feeling was there needed to be due process.
We want to civilianize more of the functions that we have burdened our police forces to lighten their load, and they can focus on what we want police officers focusing on. I'm wondering if it's worth trying a different path where we don't require sworn officers.
I think that we have a fairly good bill to start a pilot with, and a lot of these questions are gonna get answered after that.
Sure.
I just think that, there's gonna be some adjustment period, we're gonna figure it out, let's send this thing and see what happens.
I wouldn't go to the, what Connecticut did with a high speeder. I mean,
Okay.
at first off, I mean, let's get some experience here. I don't know. I'm trying to minimize, if we really want this civil, the question then becomes, do you need a law enforcement for a civil action? But then the second time around, there is a,
I mean, I'm speaking with Anthea early on. I remember she was saying she felt like that that you need to have due process, or that people would want to have due process if you're gonna have multiple violations. And then to have that, then you need to have a sworn officer to then defend it. And
well, maybe you only need a sworn up for the second time where in fact there is a fine. I don't know. I mean,
if it's a violation, yeah. So I'm not sure. So I guess the question is, do we, like Senator Ingles just said, do we want to pass this and have that kind of worked out and have the agency weigh in, have the House, we can flag it to the House. I did talk to Senator Sears. He said he didn't think they wanted to take it up. But I know in discussions with members of the other body, the Senate, the House Judiciary Committee, and the chair of that committee sponsored a bill on ATLE this year. So I think they will take it up and maybe take it.
And I think that we look at 95, which is basically a war zone compared to what we have for traffic.
Right.
They had 2.6 million vehicles, they had 500,000 vehicles speeding, they had 24,000 warnings issued and 659 citations. I mean, I don't even know how little, that we're gonna have.
Right.
But it certainly aren't gonna be to those numbers.
Right. And I think, even though there is some desk work for the officer, it's not a lot, because it's the vendor will be sending them an image, and they basically, I think, would just look at the image, say, yep, that's a car with a license plate, yes or no. It's like, it's not gonna take, and I mean, I get the point that it could be 1,000 over the summer or something, so somebody is spending some time doing that, but is it?
and it could in fact,
I guess that's the.
yeah, and they could, I'm just thinking, even though the pilot might be in one geographic area and one police barracks, you could have someone, any
Yeah.
place, any, sheriff's office, you name it, to review it and do the,
And maybe there's time where somebody's on desk duty for some other reason, or injured or something, they can work, but they can't
Correct.
be on patrol car. And then if the goal is safety, it's like, is it better to have them sitting in a car or
yeah.
just doing this automatically?
Well, and I think so too, on that point, Senator, is to get the desired results of 18% reduction is what they've seen
Yeah.
versus having people out there actually stopping vehicles. I mean, that's a time savings in itself.
Yeah.
So if you actually have a deputy sheriff sitting there at the site, which we do now, maybe they can do the review while they're sitting there
Right, on their computer,
with their
yeah.
blue light,
And-
waiting, because they can't leave.
And you
doing
might wanna
something.
think that they might want to have something to do. It's gonna be one of the most important things in the whole wide
So
world.
I think there's ways of doing it that doesn't create a huge workload, considering this number of options you have in terms of law enforcement here.
Okay. Good discussion. So we'll go back to, so we did page 3,
And you do not want to talk with Ledge Council for Judiciary, at least at the time being.
enough.
We've talked ourselves out.
Okay, I thought that's what you did, but I wanted to make sure. So on page 7 is the next change
Oh,
at the
and
very top. And this, if you'll remember, the last version said that a second violation would be considered a second violation only if it was more than 30 days after the first violation itself had occurred. And you had it changed to, it would only be considered a second violation if it was at least 30 days after the date on which the notice of the first violation was mailed. So you put it out a little bit.
I think it had 2 weeks, but that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know if 30 days is the right number, but
We'll find out.
I think the next change is, okay, I'm just gonna, the next change is on page 23, and there's another companion change on page 26. This is the provision that you wanted to make sure that the pilot did not go forward if federal funding did not occur. So I just want to give you a little bit of the process just to know why I drafted it the way I did. And I did talk with Jen Carby about it because it was a little unusual. And I've got to say again, Anthea did an amazing job with this really complex set of what's happening when. The pilot, if the money comes through in the fall or whenever it's expected or hoped to come through, the language that actually would create the pilot doesn't go into effect until July 1 of 2025. Then the way the language is now in July, what would end up being July 1 of 2027, that language would be repealed and it would be replaced by other language. When we talked last time, so that's July 1, 2027. When we talked last time, you said you didn't want the pilot to go forward if the money wasn't there. So because of the way that this is drafted, and I didn't want to monkey too much with it because she did such a wonderful job with it, what will actually happen is that pilot language will go into effect on July 1, 2025, but then on July 2nd, 2025, it will be repealed.
if there's no money.
If there's no money. And it's just done that way because that was the least amount of monkeying that had to occur to have that work. And it didn't seem, when I was thinking through it, and please tell me if this is wrong, but it didn't seem as though there would be any harm to having that language on the books for a day. It's nothing's going to happen if it's on the book for a day. And then on the way that she has written,
why don't you use July 1 then?
because the way that she has written, and this is the part that I really don't want to,
Because it's July 1 of 2027.
25.
It goes into effect one day and then gets repealed the next.
It gets repealed the next, and the reason is that she has if you look above on page 23, the repeal of that, that is not where it is. It's actually in the effective date. That new language that you want to go into effect either on July 1st of 2027 or whenever we find out that the funding isn't there. If you look on page 26, no, it's
6.
it says actually they will take effect. This is line 15. Shall take effect upon the repeal of that date. So it didn't give a specific date. It said it would take effect upon the repeal. So it's whenever it's repealed. And the only way that you can repeal that language is if it actually went into effect. So we had to have them, one happen and then the other happen.
So
So
that's why you added pursuant to.
exactly. So it's complicated, but I think it's the simplest way of dealing with it and not monkeying at all with what she did that really set it up really nicely.
So the self-destruct we're talking about here?
This is that,
Sort of a self-destruct, but it was there, the ALPR was already self-destructing, so we're just kind of adding on, following that. That was gonna be repealed next year, 2027,
the LPR is the,
automatic license plate.
both that and the,
License plate.
right, that was all going to be repealed. The Judicial Bureau jurisdiction over automatic traffic law enforcement and the automatic law enforcement pilot were both going to be repealed on July 1 of 2027. However, if they don't get the funding, it'll be repealed on July 2nd of 2025. And that's to allow this language here to and I can explain that in writing better if this is what you agree to.
The only question I have, we require the Department of Public Safety to shall either adopt rules as permitted or amended, or shall file a written report without study commission. Explaining why rules were given. So I just wanted to know, I didn't want to force them to write rules, so they don't have to do rules, because it seems like writing rules for a pilot is maybe a lot of work. So they can send us a letter saying why are not necessary, why rules are necessary. And they could be saying rules are necessary with the pilot.
Right, I think also technically the way that it's written,
This is
it says is that
section 3 on
page 21, lines 16 to 17. I think because it says that Department of Public Safety shall either adopt rules as permitted, as added or amended by section 1. If section 1 doesn't go into, well, section 1 would go into effect.
So this
After
is or
this.
shall file a written report. So
Yeah,
I guess we're saying this is public safety, not transportation, but we're saying that that letter or that written report could be that the reason is that it's a pilot project. It seems like it's weird to go through the whole rulemaking process for a pilot.
and I don't think they have to because if they, oh, I'm sorry, for a pilot
For the
project.
pilot project.
Oh, okay, all right, I'm sorry, I thought you meant that if it didn't get the funding, I'm sorry, I was.
Yeah, well, that too, but this makes it seem like
May adopt rules. It doesn't say shall adopt rules.
It does, shall either,
License.
it's saying file a report or file rules.
either adopt rules as permitted or shall file a written report.
I'm on page 12, what page are you on?
21.
So on page.
Maybe if we don't really,
I'm sorry, I just see what you're saying, because actually the
Page
rules are permitted, they're not required under section 1.
Section 1 on page 12.
I saw rules referenced on page 12.
Oh, I see, it says notwithstanding rulemaking, Department of Public Safety may adopt rules.
is that related to?
Yeah, how does that
Public
relate to
records?
that? Section 3. Proceed. Implement this section and this section is section 1.
If Michelle's on, does she maybe have a thought on if we want to make this more permissive and optional rulemaking in a pilot?
Well, wait,
It's public
what
safety,
is, yeah, but
This is-
on page 12 is Public Records Act is being referenced here as opposed to.
But the rulemaking is about the pilot, because this goes back to section 1606 which began on page 4, and that was about your pilot project. So on page 12, it's authorizing but not requiring the Department of Public Safety to adopt the rules.
What does B do that is different than what notwithstanding the Public
B
Records
is
Act
in-
exemption?
It's about recorded images, about whether the recorded images are part of, would have to be revealed as part of the Public Records Act or could be kept private. And it is dealing with that. It isn't dealing with the rulemaking at all.
Michelle, you came on camera. Did you want to say something?
Thank you. Actually, for the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. I don't think I identified myself earlier. I guess I would recommend that for the pilot, rulemaking might be overly burdensome. And that if the program were to advance into a normal program going forward after the pilot, then perhaps rulemaking would be appropriate at that time.
Well, I think that's sort of what we're thinking is some,
I
I
think
don't know,
that,
do we need a statement that rulemaking is not
No, I think-
required or just?
well, I think that on 12 is May, and then they will just choose not to, but I wondered if we're running into a contradiction on that.
Page 21 versus page 12?
Yeah,
I don't think so unless I'm not thinking of the same contradiction you're thinking of, because on page 12, it says that they may do it, that
Yeah.
they're not required. Page 21, it says on line 16, shall either adopt rules as permitted, it doesn't say as required,
I see, yeah,
or it shall file a written report.
saying why they didn't do it.
So should we change that around adopting rules, or since they don't really have to, is it, I don't know, is it clearer to say for the purposes of the pilot, rulemaking would not be
Well, since that's-
required?
Michelle's nodding enthusiastically.
Yeah, it's as permitted, and since the permit is a May, I think that's covered. Although only one thing I was like, do we need to have them write a report about why they didn't do it if we're giving them the May? So we could, I think if we just said the Department of Public Safety, again, may adopt rules. I just wonder why we write it again in this section at all, I guess.
But if in fact for pilot, we don't want to put that administrative burden out there at all, I mean, you're saying, well, they may, so they don't have to do it if they don't want to. Wouldn't it be clearer to affirmatively say that for the purpose of the pilot, rulemaking, I don't know, would not be required? In other words, state right up front, you don't have to do rulemaking. And there's,
But that's the default, is it not? Like, they never have to make rules unless we said it.
I know, but the question is, if we really, in fact, don't think rulemaking is necessary, why don't we say that affirmatively as opposed to a default? I guess that's really what we're debating here.
May I ask a question? If this, well, it's going to be automatically repealed in 2027 if it does go forward, but it is in statute, the language here that permitted them on page 12. You might say, if you would want them to do rulemaking, if it does become a long-term project,
Right.
and you don't want to have to go back in, you want to just be able to repeal the repeal and have it continue after 2027, you might say shall adopt rules, and then in this section 21, say, say that for the purposes of the pilot project, the rulemaking is not required during the first 2 years, or I don't know, something like that. That it could be that instead, I suppose.
I mean, I think it's okay to say may, but in section 3 rulemaking, we don't have to say or shall write a written report. It just continues to be may.
Oh, so, or may file a written report?
You can keep it the way it is, shall either adopt rules or just, may adopt rules, I guess, just say, I guess it's repeating. I guess, do we need section 3, I guess, is the question.
That's what I was thinking too. So on section 3, line 16, replace that shall with a may,
Or
and
just strike section 3. What is the value of section 3? If we have that 12, on page 12, where we say they may adopt rules, do we need section 3 at all?
Do they need permission to adopt rules?
Well, we already.
You're
they
giving
don't-
them the permission.
And they don't need permission, because they have, don't they also already have to follow
Is this prescriptive language, Senator Kitchell?
Well,
gratuitous?
Gratuitous?
I don't know. That's what I think we're really struggling, what rulemaking may adopt rules. And this is all related to this pilot
Right, and
on page 12.
I think that what section 3 does on page 21 is says if they choose, essentially is what it's saying, if they choose not to adopt rules, then you'd like them to file a written report saying why.
Right, and I don't think we.
And so I think that's what the purpose of this
I
is.
understand, and I guess I would be, well,
I mean, I don't care if it happens or not, I'm just telling you, I think that's
And
the
I'm
purpose
just
of
like,
section
If
3.
in fact, we're basically saying for a pilot, we don't think going through the rulemaking process, which is very labor intensive and timely, just doesn't make sense. Why don't we just state it up front? That's really what, as opposed to a default.
And I think we're assuming that may, because there might be an instance that they want to or need to if there's some issue. So I don't want to say they can't write rules.
No.
Maybe they might need to, but I think we can get rid of rule
Well,
section 3.
I don't know, I guess I would just say for the purposes of this pilot, rulemaking is not required.
That's not what we're doing by saying we may adopt them.
Not expected.
I'm just thinking that would keep it open if they want, for some reason, did want to file rules, but, I don't know, I guess one is just making an affirmative statement and the other is sort of, if not, then this, so it's more of a tautology as opposed to, you don't have to do it.
I worry that if we strike the whole section, if there's some other statute elsewhere or administrative bulletin that just dictates that rules are always required, that it makes them
We
explicitly.
still have that language on page 12 that says they may adopt rules.
Broadly across everything and not just on public records.
Yeah, because that's not relating to B, that's relating to the whole
And B is
section.
relating to L, so M is related to.
So that's for that whole section, but I guess in the the Administrative Rules Act, they might have to do rules or somebody can petition them to do rules. So there is a process that, if an agency or department has a program, people can petition them to kind of try to force rules.
So why do we need it in both places?
I think the first point, the one on page
12.
12 was in statute giving them the option that you are authorizing them, if they choose to, that they can do it. I think the purpose of section 3 is essentially saying, it could have been said in a different way. And the other way to have said it would be, if they choose not to do it, come back to us and give us a written report why. That's what section 3 is essentially saying.
We don't need a written report. So I think if we just get rid of 3,
And 12 carries it, saying you may or may
you
not.
may or may not, and
I think 3 just adds confusion
Yeah.
then.
so let's strike
Take
3.
3 out. Okay.
And they'll either do it or not, and very likely won't, and we won't care.
And if at some point you
Well,
want them,
pilot.
if at some point you want them to, you can change them as you shall.
Well, obviously, if they move beyond a pilot and expand, then they would.
If people might want them to have a rule. So you don't have to have a rule. It's my understanding.
Just for a possible vote, I'm fine with that if you want to get it out today. Is there a motivation to do it today rather than after we come back? Time pressure?
Just
get it out.
Move it along. It has to go to finance. You could, make changes in finance. Finance is gonna have a lot of bills, so I thought if we get it out today, get it to finance, then as all the other bills are trying to hit the deadline to get to finance, this gives it a little more time to do it. But we could look into this and then maybe make a change in finance or
Yeah, or for
or on the floor. But I would say let's get rid of section 3 for today's purposes.
I think that's a good,
Prior to maybe making a motion, just one other big question I have about this bill, it came up from Representative Harrison of Chittenden. He said something about how there's a repeal that's gonna happen, so if we didn't do anything, are we addressing that in this bill for ALPRs? Where are we addressing the repeal that's gonna happen absent action?
that's
That's
we did.
page 23, it's currently section 5, it will become section 4.
Page 23.
There's a prospective repeal already in session law, and you are repealing it.
I'm not asking to do this on the floor, but I don't quite understand what repeal we're repealing, but we don't need to know.
That means we allow the automated license plate recognition system to continue. That gets
I
here.
have this lovely thing that will help you know what's happening, when.
So there's an open question for me as to what repeal we're repealing, but.
Because I think the ALPR is gonna be, if we don't do anything, would be repealed in 2024.
That's right, when it's July 1st.
But what's being repealed? 'Cause
The whole, the authority to use them.
I thought it was the prevention to use them. And
No.
no, because Representative Harrison said if we just let this go and sunset it, then you can start using them again.
Because two things will happen.
Okay.
That new language will come into play.
The new language in here,
The new language that you already have.
so that I get. But if this bill doesn't pass, somebody vetoes it. My understanding is that the repeal would then allow for ALPRs to be used, but I don't know. This is an open question to me that,
I think that's right. I think that's correct. That would be happening. And that was one of the concerns that would default back, and then there aren't any standards. It would just be unaddressed.
Actually, section 1607, if nothing passes and the repeal goes forward, sections 1607 and 1608, which are currently in law, will be repealed.
So the standards go away.
So that is, 1607 is the automatic license plate recognition systems. It's all the definitions, it's the operation, who can do it. 1608 is the preservation of data. Both of those will be
So I
repealed.
think you are right that the restrictions we put on license plate
Would
readers
go
will
away.
go away on July 1st, 2024.
I think it'll be useful for any floor speech. What are we fixing?
So what it basically allows those conditions, that those standards and limitations continue.
2027.
Right. They continue as they are until 2025, and then they are amended in 2025.
Whether we have funding or for the pilot or not. If there's funding, then they'll continue. If there's not funding, then they get repealed.
Yes.
If we're not doing the pilot, then they would get repealed in 2025. I think.
But what will be repealed is the current restrictions.
Yes, I think.
Then it would allow.
Yeah, then there'll be no standards and no parameters around the use,
Police officer,
which
yeah.
is what
So that's part of-
existed before we put that language in.
So part of the problem that this bill is proposing to fix is it's addressing the looming repeal of current restrictions of the ALPR. So
Whether that's a problem probably depends on your point of view, but that we're addressing that issue. Some people might see it as a problem.
yeah.
Problem to not have standards?
Yeah.
Want a motion on a draft with section 3 removed?
Yeah,
No, we can move the bill as,
that's what he's.
it's a committee bill, so you don't even need to vote on the amendment. I mean, striking 3, just a,
And then
No.
changing the numbers
Yeah.
accordingly.
So those are saying,
But we would vote on it. We could have a motion to vote on that.
yeah,
That's what he's.
I would move to approve this bill.
but it would be draft 3.2
Or 4.1, whatever you want to call it.
It's up to you, though.
Which covers.
4.1.
4.1.
Yeah, it makes it look like we did more work. It's a higher draft number.
I move to adopt draft 4.1.
Okay,
Move
Does
the
our-
bill favorably.
Favor.
do we have a clerk sheet thing?
Printing right
Printing
now.
now? Do we have a clerk? We do.
Did your daughter have a good time?
She said she did. Want to come down and see Jen Miller?
Oh, because she remembers during the page time. Oh, it was a good day to come.
She's on vacation this week, so.
Yeah.
Got some homework done.
Was she paged this week this year or last year?
Go to it, she was saying she'd come back with a letter.
Page online.
Campaign's gonna get a run against me in the next election.
I know, yeah, he was talking to her. he introduced me as your,
Draft number 3.1.
4.1.
4.1. And we have it right here. Actually, do we have?
Bill number 184.
Yeah. We have that, I don't need to have that. We got 4.1 right there. Okay, so we are going to have a vote on 184, S 184, draft 4.1, with A. Perchlik being the reporter. And we can do it
They're
as.
having you the reporter?
I don't know. Yeah.
Apparently.
Well,
You gotta take the vote before he has anything to report.
okay, so sounds
Then
good.
we'll decide who the reporter is.
So we are going to go with Senator Chittenden,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Senator Ingles is a yes. Senator Mazza is not present. Senator Perchlik.
Aye.
Okay, so we are
4-0.
4-0-1 and so.
Does anybody want to report? I don't mind reporting it. Anytime. Then there's nothing to really break up as far as this section, so I'll just do it.
May I
And
ask,
maybe you would be able to do your little flow chart.
I'll do a flow chart, and I can do it section by section too,
Yeah.
just so you can get through it.
That would be good.
May I just ask you, I know that the process for I know what the process for committee bills is now, because I dealt with it yesterday, but what's the process now for, this is a strike all? It's
This is
not
an
active.
amendment of the committee of the bill, strike all amendment.
So how, right, so how what is the process to get it to?
We bring up you would give us a clean copy of 4.1 without the highlights and without the
And then
section.
the reporter takes the vote up. and-
Okay, that's how it works now,
And the
okay.
original bill plus the strike all.
The original bill plus the 4.1,
Yeah.
and then Megan keeps this.
And it goes upstairs, it doesn't go, you don't bring it to drafting ops the way you would if it was a committee bill.
Right, we just
Okay.
bring it up, because since they are in impression of it.
Okay, great, thank you. I
Although
will-
this isn't the bill, so we probably won't attach it to this.
You have to put it through drafting.
Correct. So I will
This
do
is
that.
3.1, we don't need that.
Okay.
We're doing
Okay, yeah, there we
4.1.
go.
Well, I'll give you,
I will
I'll
do
get
this
it,
later.
so you're ready to go.
And get that to you.
Although it doesn't need to be clipped, right, but that just goes in your regular bag.
Mhm.
Yes, yeah, they don't need this.
Yeah, so when you just give it to me and then I'll take it to the secretary's office,
And you'd like to get it in today if possible, so I'll let drafting ops know that.
And you're the reporter.
and I'll do the report. So that's that. So now we hoped you would spend some time going over the T-bill, which probably has a number now, or
It is, it does have a number, it is H868.
868.
Are you going to look at at pages? Do I need to be pointing you to pages?
Do we have,
or-
I don't know if we have the,
I printed it out, we have it right here,
okay.
and it's posted.
54 pages, doesn't say draft.
Correct.
They just passed it out of committee, so who knows if there'll be floor amendments or finance.
It actually just was sent yesterday as well to Ways and Means, and then after that, it's gonna go to finance.
Approach.
Excuse me. Oops.
What do they call it? Are they?
Yep, it's probes.
And probes, and so they don't have finance, they have ways and means.
Okay.
Okay, let me bring it up. Wait.
So we have until 10:15?
Yes,
Okay. I will,
you can
I
get
will
as
speak
far as
quickly.
transportation bill.
So section 1, which begins in all essence on page 2,
Adoption of the white book.
it's adopting the White Book as amended, as revised, and it includes the standard definitions, except there is one additional definition that they added yesterday. It's on page 3, line 5, and it's a definition of mileage-based user fee. Section 2, okay, this is the money, these are the money sections.
Money
Sec-
or muddy?
Money.
Where they're changing.
Right, so section 2, I would ask you just, it's many different layers of of transactions
Oh
that
my
all
goodness, they're
lead.
taking it out of public transit?
That's why I was gonna ask you, don't read ahead. Please don't read ahead because there's a series of things that are happening that all lead to the final.
Waterfall. We don't use that word.
It's not really a waterfall. So what they're planning to do is first take 1.7 out of the grants for public transit. And that's federal money, and that's reflected on page 4 in the various lines. You'll see on the top of page 5, it then says that 1.7 is going to be reflected as a reduction of the carbon reduction funding for what are the Sprinter vans. So 1.7 for the Sprinter vans will be removed, which is federal funding. And the reason that this all had to happen is because there was federal funding and state funding involved, and so it had to happen in a series of steps. Then that 1.7 is going to be given, and this is on page 5, beginning on line 5, to the program, to the Environmental Policy and Sustainability Program. So they will get an additional 1.7. That 1.7 then, if you look at the very bottom of page 5, they will spend it, Environmental Policy and Sustainability Program will spend that 1.7 in consultation with the central garage to towards electrifying the central garage fleet. Then if you turn, so that's federal money that can be used for that purpose. Then if you turn to page 6,
You're taking it out. And
central garage will have 1.7 less because it's getting that 1.7 put in from federal money. So it's having 1.7 of internal services fund taken out because it's getting the 1.7 put in. So I think it's not the T fund, because the T fund, it would just say state. It's actually the central garage fund, I think, maybe, or something. It's a separate thing.
Let me move very fiscal. So it's the central garage fund, which will be taking money and they'll be transferring it into the T fund. So then we have essentially pure T fund dollars.
It's a way to kind of launder federal money.
You
Well,
could phrase it that way.
Don't use that
No,
term.
no, you're dominoing the money. That's what you're doing.
So you're taking the federal money and now it's being used.
Central garage money is all from the T fund.
Correct. Yeah,
It's
it
all
goes, it
T
runs
fund
through
anyway you
maintenance.
cut.
But it's-
Maintenance has
yeah,
a portion of maintenance budget goes to essentially pay the central garage.
So you're using federal fund money for central garage now and taking the state money out. And then you'll see on page 6, line 11, that 1.7 is then given as one-time transportation fund monies to the agency, which shall pass it along to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development in order to provide grants to increase level 1 and level 2 EVSE charging ports only at workplaces and multi-unit dwellings, not at, they're allowed to give grants at like ski resorts and things, but this money cannot be used that way.
So who is, as you're dominoing it around, then the 1.7 going to ACCD ultimately is a reduction where?
If that reduction is on the top of page 5, it's the carbon reduction funding for the Sprinter vans.
So public transit basically has
1.7 less.
Public transit was gonna use that to buy electric Sprinter vans for the microtransit or for other transit programs.
You will note though, I'm sorry.
Weren't those the vehicles they liked the best and
Well,
they
they
thought
were-
were most efficient?
Yep.
Yeah. In other words, we are basically reducing public transit support to do the,
EVSE,
to do the chargers.
right, at multi-unit dwellings and workplaces. I will point out that one thing I didn't say on page 5, line 4, is it's not totally taking away the money for the Sprinter vans. It's reducing it from 4 million to 2.3 million.
Well, we don't need to get into the debate right now, but we'll definitely.
I just-
Let's find out what's going on.
Yeah, we will have JOT tell us what their view is on that, and more later.
And then just in case you're wondering, E was added, and I think JFO's expectations is in the bottom of page 6. The expectation is it's gonna be taken out and put into the big bill if this all goes forward, is that there needed to be some internal transferring of money to make the central garage money be able to become
Yeah.
transportation fund.
But on page 5, and down at the bottom, what they're doing is saying out of the money going to central garage, they shall spend 1.7 for the electrification of the central garage fleet. So we're prescriptive about how central garage
Because-
is using.
My understanding is it's because it's federal money and it can only be used for electric vehicles, is my understanding.
But it's a condition.
Is that correct? I'm looking over at JFO.
Right,
Okay.
so, because it's carbon reduction funds that they're shifting around here, it has to have a carbon reduction nexus. So they're giving that money that was in public transit to environmental planning and saying, work with the central garage to electrify $1.7 million worth of the central garage fleet. Because central garage is the internal service fund, which maintenance pays to them, we couldn't just give it straight to central. We're working through the Department of Environmental Policy and Planning, whatever it is, to electrify the central garage fleet, because the central garage was planning to do some electrification and had done electrification in the past. It's still kind of up in the air what exactly will be electrified with this money, but that is sort of the thought process behind these transfers.
But what it's doing is by using this funding source to go into central garage, it's constraining on what they can do with it. And I don't know whether it says they shall spend 1.7. I don't know what that plan would be or the extent to which it might.
What ACCCD?
No. Central garage is gonna, in other words, we're requiring central garage to spend 1.7 million for their electrification of their fleet.
Right.
I don't know how that fits with their plan or feasibility.
No.
That raises that question, but they'll tell us, I'm sure.
Right.
Okay, the next money piece is actually now going to be in 4 sections, 3 through 6. And it begins on page 7, section 3.
Here again.
So this is nearly identical to last year's language. It's 2 million that's being taken out of operating expenses from maintenance. There's a statement that it's a top fiscal priority to try to put that money back. And then it says if there are any unexpended monies in fiscal year 2024 appropriations, that money needs to get put in to fill the 2 million that was taken out.
I wonder, the argument last year when they were trying to take money from the maintenance funds is that there was just not chronically, every year there was always a lot of money left in maintenance. Is that the argument this year as well, that there was a lot of carryover funds? Is that the right term? Carry forwards.
But maintenance, we tend to think of it, well, we had a good winter, so we didn't spend a lot.
Right.
But what they said is then if they're not spending it on winter maintenance, they are doing it on tree removal, they're using it for other transportation related
Rock fall. that there's stuff.
activities that fall within maintenance. So that it ultimately could end up with less money for those other maintenance related activities. That if you're lucky and have a warm winter, then you have more money available to support those maintenance, that type of category of maintenance activity. So
I will just add to that, money has been taken from maintenance in the past and they've been given this authority to sort of replenish themselves as needed. They haven't usually had to replenish themselves with extra funds, or they haven't chosen to at least. So it's, again, it is a question of there is a lot of variability within the maintenance season. If you have a bad winter, right, salt's very expensive. So it's kind of, you never know sort of thing.
What does the world look like if we underfund maintenance and it's a really rough winter and all of a sudden they're just out of maintenance money? Is that, what problems does that present, and does the governor not have capabilities to, I know we give them the power, but we have.
They'll
the power to
defer
purchase.
projects, that's what it comes down to. And there's language about reporting to JTOC, not JTOC. If you're making adjustments that would delay or eliminate, we have some language that's around that they would report back how they've accommodated it.
I guess I'm confusing projects and maintenance, because when you're talking maintenance, it's like the salt and the plowing, which is very highly variable, and rock falls.
And the plowing and the tree removal and.
Plowing is a big part of it.
So that's highly variable. So if we separate out projects, are projects funded from the maintenance?
No,
No,
Okay.
you're not.
So if we underfunded maintenance, which just to pay for reactions to storms and so on, what are the governors and the V-Trans options if they are out of money?
anywhere else in their budget, they could move. It could be a project like, we're not gonna do that paving project in Burlington or whatever.
I guess I'd have to look exactly. There is some limitations between moving it in between sort of the programs. They can move money within a program around. So for example, within the project development, the big 400 million or whatever, they can move those around pretty flexibly. But moving it between sort of like project development and maintenance, there's a little more restriction to that.
Do they have to go to JTOC or do they just?
I think
There's some language that allows them to go to report to.
Yeah, they would have to get some sort of authority to do that. But in the case of just maintenance, they would have to cut some sort of program or something they plan to do. If there's a really bad winter and they didn't have enough funds, it would have to come from somewhere within the maintenance department. And the agency and maintenance can probably speak to that better than I can.
think that's why there's often carry forward, because they put extra money in there in case it's a bad winter. So they don't have to do that or.
Theoretically, yeah, I think someone from the agency could really explain, what they would do in that sort of situation. But
The
that's
reason-
the general.
But the reason they go there is because that's all T funds. And and there's no federal match, so that's why it's attractive. Or it's why it's vulnerable to
Right.
this kind of.
So they don't say directly, well, like in the next sections, they spend that 2 million.
Correct, in 3 sections they do. So on page 9, you'll see that there's an additional 860,000 that's given for town highway aid. On line,
Which means that that's an ongoing base, once you move it out.
Highway have is
Correct.
the one that's on.
It-
Didn't
formula.
it raise this year anyways in the budget? Did
It
we
was level funded this
level,
year.
okay,
Yes.
raise last year though, right? Did we?
Didn't we do an
Raise-
inflationary increase on
Yeah.
that?
I thought we did.
It is tied to CPIU, but it takes the lesser of either CPIU, and there's some language that we might get to today, kind of clarifying this in statute, but it takes the lesser of CPIU or the change in T fund appropriations from 2 years ago, the prior to T fund appropriations. And because they had something, these numbers aren't exact, but like $34 million of reversions 2 years ago, it was essentially a negative appropriation change. So it was level funded, but normally not given large reversions, it would increase by the lesser of the change in appropriations or the CPIU change, which this year was 3%. And I will say the 860 is 3%.
Okay, I was thinking that.
And so, and where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, where the increase came from, it wasn't in highway aid, it was in highway bridge,
Structures?
yeah,
I
structure.
think that was a few years ago. Yeah, there was an increase, a one-time increase in those related to COVID, and there was a pause
I
one
remember
year.
that, but I thought
and
there was even
increased
one
it.
after that.
Maybe I would have to go back and look it up.
So, I'm just wondering, town, highway structures, that got changed by $1 million.
correct.
But we need to look at that within the context of what we gave to towns with that 12.5, because, some of that, spending, I don't know if it's that, where they would have been hit, we actually, well, it might be,
But these are grants for new projects, town highway structures.
yeah, I'm just looking at what we gave them for the
Right.
FEMA money of that 12.5 or 6.25 that went out for public. And I don't know whether that was influencing their decision, say, we should give the towns more money for structures because of the cost incurred because of flood damage or whatever. But I'm just saying there might be a nexus to what we already did with that 6.25 million that went out to towns to help them with their FEMA match.
Right.
So I'm just bringing it
Sure.
up. I don't know what the thinking was behind it, but.
So the top of page.
So we're
10,
gonna, sorry to interrupt, we're gonna have Chair Coffey in, so we can ask some of these questions about their thinking, so we're not forcing Donna to try to
No,
telephone what they're thinking.
Especially since I wasn't here for most of it.
I'm just bringing it up that there might be
Yeah,
a nexus
sure.
here in terms of 6.25 million that went out.
So one additional piece of that 1 million for highway structures, town highway structures is on page 10 at the top. And that is that you remember in statute that there is a minimum amount of qualifying projects for which a minimum amount of state share cost. And this is making sure that that minimum amount for this year is, for the fiscal year 25 would be increased by $1 million. So it wouldn't be like subsumed into what the minimum amount would be.
Is that? Are there more zeros?
So they're spending the 2 million by 860 to the town highway,
1
1
million.
million to structures, and 140 to e-bike.
Correct, and there is language later on that would affect the 140, but we can talk about it later for e-bikes.
Yeah, I want to talk a lot about those.
Yeah. Okay, so that's gets us to section 7.
And section 7 starts the policy pieces, so would you like to start those, or would you like to have those on a different day, or what would you like?
I think we could do, I mean, unless they all have to be taken as one lump sum.
So beginning on page 7 and continuing, page 10, section 7, and continuing until the bottom of page 11 is the new section 7, which would amend current statutes to waive the requirements for a surety bond if the contract for improvement is for 100,000 or less. And that's it.
They're quite expensive and small contractors are really disadvantaged by that.
Section 8 begins at the top of page 12. And the changes, however, this is about the delays in the program schedule. The real changes are on page 14. And I don't know if you've talked about this in the same way or if this is just something that the House has talked about, but they talked about project creep versus project spike. And so on page 14, the current law says that if project costs have increased by more than 8 million or more than 100% from the estimate in the prior fiscal year's approved program, the prior year, then there needs to be an update so that you were aware of that. They changed that so to 5 million rather than 8 million and 75%. So this is a creep.
Like the 10G report.
Oh my God.
And then on line 3, this would be if there's a spike in 1 year. So the subdivision 2, which is on line 6, talks about if there seems to be like a small amount over time, and subdivision 3 talks about if there's a big jump in 1 year, and in those cases they may.
Which we are, okay, Logan, you.
Yeah, so I don't know if Donna was here for this, so just to kind of get some background, this was coming out of the auditor did a report basically saying that he thought there should be some more oversight when these 10G reports. So this is kind of the construct that the House committee came up with to sort of add some more requirements to when projects need to be put in the 10Gs, how long they'll stay there, and what kind of projects and spikes and project price creeps would show up on the 10G.
Well, of course, the agency is responding to that by trying to get staff that have greater expertise in estimating the cost of the project. So that's more accurate, and it is a very, it's a very complicated area, I would think, doing estimates
4 years.
4 years in advance. I don't, so I thought the issue was really AOTs being so far off on the estimated cost versus actual. This is,
Well, maybe if their estimates are more accurate, then they wouldn't have to do anything, but this is tightening when they have to do something.
and the question then is, so what?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
what will we do with it?
Right, that's
What is actionable here?
Yeah, is anybody gonna do anything?
Yeah, but that's a bigger question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's fair though.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And that's, the rest of this language changes in that section,
Correct.
or just,
Yes, just minor things, clarification for the most part. Page 20 is section 9, line 10. And this would require a report before December 15th of this year with a plan of how to provide sufficient notice to House and Senate committees when an adopted program is delayed. A project under a big adopted program is delayed.
plan for
So section,
So
sorry.
what would be an example of that? So they put a project in the book, and they kind of had construction spending in 1 year, but then they're gonna not do construction spending that year, gonna do it the next year, then they have to file a report.
This is a report on whatever
How to-
plan they would create sufficient notice to you that they're going to have a delay.
Sounds like a
You can do
report about
background.
a report.
And I'll leave it up to the chair to say their intent, but I believe it's related to the last section on the 10G and the discussions they had with the agency, and essentially wanting the agency to present them a report on how they think project delays should be reported to the committees. Yeah.
Oh, so you should report on how you should report.
Okay, a report on a report.
So
Report on a
report to
plan.
us how you would recommend how you report.
Do a plan about reporting and report on that.
You need to report about those reports.
Okay,
Oh my
we will
gosh.
hear from them.
On that note, I think we ought to call it quits for today.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good one there.
We've raised the ire.
So we got through section 9, so we will start next time, Central Garage Fund, section 10. Will be the next time that we have done in, so that'll happen when we return. All right. So with that, we will adjourn for the week and for the 2-week period. And we'll